Good morning, subscribers. Welcome to episode 9 of Complex Humans. It's Tuesday morning, 10 quarter to 11 here in Sydney. And our guest for today is Sophie Phillips. And are you in Manly, Sophie?
I am. I'm in Manly, Mantown, as some people call it.
Nice. She's
Yeah.
doing the Bachelor of Creative Intelligence and Innovation with me. That's how we know each other. So what would you like to talk about today, Sophie?
Well, today I kind of wanted to talk about, obviously I'm studying a business degree with BCII. And I think as a young business student, there's a lot of pressure, I suppose, to go down the path of entrepreneurship and having your own business. But I suppose navigating that and particularly, there's a lot of pressure as well to go and work for a really well-established company before you go down that route. So often, a lot of my friends that I speak with, they're often kind of almost revolting into this kind of entrepreneurship mindset when they're working within a big organization. And I think it's really cool that larger organizations now are shifting to more of that model to allow their employees to work in this more autonomous, risk-taking behaviors, I suppose, within their role. Yeah.
So how are you navigating those pressures to? It seems that every woman and her dog wants to be an entrepreneur nowadays.
I know, right? Yeah.
So there's that, but at the same time, I know Sydney's becoming more expensive, and there's a pressure to have a steady income to be able to afford living in this great city. So how are you navigating this competing pressures, if you can call it that?
Yeah, well, I mean, at the moment, obviously, I'm at the point where I've kind of, along my way throughout uni and interacting with different people that I'm studying similar things to me, I've, collaborated with them on a few different ideas and things that we've kind of come to a conclusion and thought, wow, we could really monetize this. There's a huge gap in the market here, and there's great opportunity, but obviously there's the constraints of being a young uni student. You don't have access to the money and maybe the mindsets that are out there to help you leverage this idea and take it to market. So obviously, I mean, there's a lot of cool competitions and things going around, particularly for chicks. Like I know there's She Starts with Blue Chili. That's a really cool competition. I love that. I did end up sort of coming up with an idea that I wanted to leverage through that particular competition last year with a friend of mine who's also studying BCII. But we ended up not leveraging it purely because, if you are to pursue an entrepreneurship venture, if you are to go and start your own business at a young age, often you'll have to kind of give and take a little bit with your studies. And that was something that freaked me out a bit, because at the time the She Starts competition clashed with one of the BCII schools. And I thought, you know what, this degree that I'm studying in, it's if I put the pause button on this now, I'm not actually, like, I could have to wait a whole nother year to do this. And I sort of thought, you know what, the idea is not at the stage that I want it to be yet, so I'm going to workshop it and wait until I feel that it's at the stage that it's ready to go into one of these competitions as a startup. But I think it's definitely a lot of pressure, particularly, would you agree, in a degree like BCII, where different people are coming up with these amazing ideas and, they're actually going and leveraging them. Would you say that you feel a bit of pressure as well yourself to try and come up with some amazing idea and bring it to market?
Yeah, the one of the reasons I went back to university is because of BCII. I was very much intrigued with the course. As we know, it's a new course. And when I was looking at this, there's two schools of thought, basically. I mean, there's not only two, but the two, I just highlight two of them. One comes from Paul Graham. He started Y Combinator. So he was one of the early. I think they built the first e-commerce site, and then they sold it to Yahoo. And the money he got from that, he started this. He was the first really incubator. They were the first to give like a small amount of money in very early stage startups. And to him, his and he also writes essays, which is fascinating. So he's this guy who can program and also writes beautifully. So he has both the arts thing and the tech thing going on with him. And he's also married to a person who the both of them run the startup. So Jessica, she wrote this book called Founders at Work. So she wrote about early stage founders. So to him, his view is when you're in university, you shouldn't try to start startups because in university, that's where you learn stuff. That's where you follow your interests. Because to him, like like when Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, he wasn't thinking of having this $1 billion company. He was just interested in having the yearbook online. So he just followed his interests. And everybody knows the story of Steve Jobs, who studied calligraphy. And it wasn't related to what they were doing while at uni was not related to the eventual company that they founded, but they just went deep into what they were interested in. Like because Steve Jobs was interested in calligraphy, that translated into the beautiful fonts in the first Macintoshes. So they were the first computers with beautiful font compared to the ugly, the IBM. It's functional, simply functional. He's the first one. Let's make this font beautiful. So they just pursued the interests, and by pursuing the interests, it led to startups. So that's one school of thought.
I think that's something that I find so beautiful about BCII is that we're all kind of doing our own thing, but at the same time, it'll be really weird, we have a conversation with someone who's studying something completely unrelated. You find you both have this amazing interest that kind of marries together on a particular topic.
Yeah.
You realize, oh my gosh, we've been thinking the exact same thing this entire time, but if we hadn't been in the same place at the same time right now, we wouldn't have known that. So yeah, definitely. I think another thing as well that I've sort of faced particularly, I guess maybe it's sort of something that I've thought about, but other people I know have also said the same thing to me. And this whole kind of idea of intrapreneurialism and entrepreneurialism, it's not necessarily something that we focus on in BCII, but it's more so like the methods and the schools of thinking that you were talking about that kind of align with entrepreneurship, but it's not necessarily the same thing. Like, I think that's a really almost like a common misconception about what the degree is and startups on the side, because a lot of people think that they're almost the same thing, that we're just this hub of startup activity, but really we're more about the critical mindset and the thinking behind the story that goes on before you can create that amazing idea. And I totally agree with what you're saying. That's what uni's all about. It's all about networking and meeting with these amazing have these amazing trains of thought that lead you to a certain discovery somewhere. So
And then the opposing view there is Peter Thiel. He was one of the founders of PayPal. And the PayPal mafia, all of them went to start YouTube, LinkedIn, and all these other great startups from the same people. So his view, he has this scholarship to people that he'll give money to a student for them to drop out and pursue their startups full time. So that's a different view. He just says, stop studying and just do this thing you want to do. So that's two ways of looking at it, and it's interesting. Like when Peter Thiel wrote this book called From Zero to One. So it's an interesting take on things that's the hardest bit. The real innovation happens when you go from 0 to 1. And then the rest is this globalization where people just copy the models that's already working. The hard bit is the initial one, that it creates something that wasn't there before. So in a way, it's like, for example, when Airbnb released a whole latent market, they went from that market wasn't really there, and then they created it, and now other people are copying them. So the real innovation is the from 0 to 1, and so that's another thing that that it's hard, because in a way you have to be contrarian. Like when apparently when the Airbnb founders were pitching the idea, like the people listening to them, that's a stupid idea, you know. They were actually funded by Y Combinator. They say, who would
Yeah,
want, who would let people stay in their houses? Who would want that? And then,
exactly.
but they invested on them because of them as people. Because Y Combinator has this theory that they're really investing on the people, not the idea, because the ideas can change during the incubation period. But they're
Yeah.
really investing in is on the people, and if they work together, if they have the skills, they have the drive and the passion for it. So finally, the Airbnb founders were almost bankrupt, and that's why they said, they were living in this apartment in the Bay Area, and then one of them just says, I'm just gonna move out and live with my parents because we can't pay the rent, and we need to get this startup happening. Why don't we just rent this room? And since there's no bed in it, we'll just put an air bed. That's where the name came from. It's an air bed and breakfast. So it's like interesting. Now they're $1 billion company, but they were really struggling at that point, and no one would believe in them. It's Y Combinator who saw their potential. They even made like cereals. They were like a graphic designer. So this was during the Obama campaign. So they made
Oh,
cereals with Obama's and McCain's or something, and they sold them. And then they brought them during the interview, and I think it's what swung them because according to Paul Graham and the other people, these people know how to hustle. If they're prepared to use cereal to keep their startup going, I think they can pull this through, even though it seems like an impossible idea. They have the stamina and the willpower to make it happen. And yeah, so how do you go through the difficulties of of starting something new? Like you've had experience starting startups, right? How do
um,
you persist given that sometimes, it's like you keep hitting wall after wall after wall?
yeah, I think part of the issue is that we place so much emphasis on you know, a particular type of innovation, which is where you are the first person to create a product within a completely new market. There's so much pressure to innovate with
Right.
that kind of space. But I think, there's a lot of really important incremental process innovation that occurs along the
Cool.
way. Take the example of, say, Apple and then Samsung and Microsoft, how they've kind of replicated a lot of things that Apple has initially created, like the tablet. But
Yeah.
now Apple is no longer the market leader in, say, manufacturing, producing, and selling these tablets onto people. So it just
Mm.
goes to show that there's some really important work that can be done within the innovation sphere that is not necessarily in the new market leading sort of zone, I suppose. And I think
Yeah.
it can take a certain amount of pressure off young individuals that are being
Mhm.
told, you've got to come up with the next big thing. Like,
True, true.
we stop
Yeah.
so much emphasis on that. And, there's so many things around us that they're not working quite perfectly yet. We think, oh my gosh, that's so cool, but what if we tweaked this little element of it?
Yeah.
I suppose we have to kind of weigh up what innovation, what degree of innovation do we value more, which type of innovation. And I suppose that just comes really down to like public perception in the first place of what should be rewarded,
Yeah.
Some people would argue that what Samsung and Microsoft have done is in some ways sort of copying what Apple has done, but in some ways they've changed the shape of it and completely created it into this new reimagination of what Apple initially started out with. So it's an interesting conversation to have, particularly with you as a product designer. And
It's
yeah,
funny. It's funny you mentioned Apple. People tend to mythologize. It seems that it's a bit like the case of Al Gore inventing the internet. But actually, most of the things that Apple used were invented back in the 70s, and it's by a group of people in the Palo Alto Research Center. It's the Xerox Spark.
yeah,
Brilliant people, like they're the ones who invented the Ethernet, they invented the mouse, the graphical user interface, the laser printer. And the funny thing was, you were talking about this incremental development. So the whole research lab was funded by Xerox.
Yeah.
So what they did was they just give a bunch of money to these smart people and then just do whatever you want. And so they invented all these cool things, but then no one in the company saw their potential. They just think, oh, because Xerox was earning so much money there with the copiers. They just had this extra money. The way that Google has so much extra money now, they're just funding a lot of whatever research. But at that time, Xerox failed to see it, and it was Steve Jobs who visited Park, who saw the graphical user interface and said, "Hang on, this is useful. We could use this." So he actually copied it from them. So
Yeah, I suppose they probably didn't put a patent on it back then. Like they probably just thought it was some useless piece of IP that they're never going to use. But no, obviously Steve Jobs used it, and he used it pretty.
yeah, it's just blindness. Like so you're in business school, and it's a classic case that Xerox thought they were in the copier business. They didn't see that they were in the document business or the information business. They didn't see it much wider. In the same way that Kodak thought they were in the film business. They
Kodak
didn't
is
that
such a
they were
classic.
in the they were in the imaging business. So they actually Kodak actually invented the first digital camera. They just didn't. They just it was threatening their main thing. Like the same way that the railroad companies, they didn't. They had all the money and they could have invested in airlines, but they didn't. In the same way that that telephone companies, they should be the one inventing mobile phones, but not really. You know, why did Apple? Why is it Apple that had to innovate that space wherein the telcos had so much money and they knew the industry? They could have done the smartphone, but they didn't because people just get locked up into one way of thinking. So I guess you're right. You don't have to be there's so much noise about disruption, disrupt this, disrupt that, but it's not about destroying the old and creating something totally new. You're right. It's about more of tinkering, right?
Mm. And I think, you know what, like the only time that you're ever going to really come out with some amazing product and successfully create this new market is when the barriers to entry is so little. And it's so, like, it's rare when that happens because majority of the time now, these big, like super powerful businesses are constantly on the lookout for ways that new entrants, startups, things like that can come in and completely take a big chunk of their business and make a lot of their products and services redundant. So, I mean, it's tricky because a lot of the time, these amazing services like, the smartphone, that's like a generic example, there were such little barriers to entry for Apple to come into that market that they were so successful. It was something so new, and I suppose it was exactly what the consumers were looking for without these big telecom companies predicting that something like that would happen in the first place. So yeah, it's definitely comes down to, I think, a lot of the market forces. I'm thinking like Michael Porter's 5 forces. I was just doing a lecture on that this morning, so it's like so in my brain. But yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, it's definitely one of those things. New entrants, it's when you get it right, it's so good. But I think it comes down to ultimately the small incremental process innovations throughout the value chain.
Yeah, and also I don't know if you've already discussed in one of your subjects in business, the innovator's dilemma by Clayton Christensen, and he talks about like all these new innovations. They started out as toys, so like really like the personal computer. When IBM was king, you never get fired for choosing IBM. All the computers were big servers, and then Steve Wozniak, and he worked with Steve Jobs to create the Apple One and the Apple Two. They just wanted to have their own computer to play with. That's how they started, and so IBM just ignored them. They're just toys, and then suddenly, oh, they woke up one day, they had to catch up with the personal computing thing. And in the same way, how Microsoft got into the thing because IBM didn't, I don't know, they didn't have enough time, or they just didn't bother creating their own operating system for the IBM PC. So they just got this little scrawny kid called Bill Gates. All right, we'll buy your DOS operating system, and then they just saw their whole market being gobbled up by this
Mm,
company called Microsoft. This one little student from Harvard who wrote this operating system, who saw the potential for this. So yeah, so like applying the same logic. So a lot of people are now dissing Bitcoin. That there's nothing there. It's just it will never. And this is the same mentality when the big mainframes were saying, "Oh, these personal computers, they're just for amateurs. It's just for enthusiasts." And they're saying the same now. "Oh, with Bitcoin, it's just for enthusiasts." And
I
like,
think it's so interesting that you picked up on that because recently there's been like people are saying that, but at the same time, there's so many kind of warning signs that are like staring at us in the face saying that we're moving towards a cashless economy. Like,
yeah,
I think now it's something like, I don't know the exact percentage, but ATM cash withdrawals are decreasing at such a rapid rate. People are constantly adopting new online payment methods.
yeah.
The cashless economy, honestly, I'm 100% certain that it will eventuate. And the fact that people are still saying, "Oh no, we're gonna bring out a new $5 note and a new $10 note," they get excited over that, and I think, "Oh, we're not gonna be using them very soon," but you know.
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, cashless is useless. Yeah, there's
Mm,
also a danger if we become digital cash only, and if we still have a centralized currency, then there's a potential that we can be surveilled in everything we spend. That's the danger of that. That's why we
that's,
need technologies like the Bitcoin and the blockchain, the distributed ledger is protected. It's not controlled by anyone. It's the
yeah,
network,
yeah.
and it's just protected by math. So no, it's cryptography, and people just agreeing to connect with each other. Really, that's why like Mark Andreessen, he's the guy who co-founded Netscape, and he's also famous for writing that article on the Wall Street Journal that software is eating the world. He's quite bullish on Bitcoin, but not really Bitcoin, but the real innovation is in the distributed ledger. That's a trustless system, the blockchain that enables people to transact securely without a centralized authority, and that's big because it can potentially undermine banks and governments. Because if I could transact with you, Sophie, using a currency that's not issued by the government, and I know it's secure and I know that it's safe, then government will start losing their power, and then I don't know. It's going to be an interesting world we're looking at.
Definitely.
Are
Because
you
if we,
guys discussing much of this in your business school, like the blockchain and all that technology?
interestingly, not that much, which, to be honest, like, I don't know if it's, universities in general are slower to pick up on changing their subject matter and things like that. UTS is
Mhm.
good at kind of making things constantly relevant for everybody, but like, if I've spoken about Bitcoin or any kind of digital currency stuff, it's mainly within BCII.
Right.
I think it's definitely something that people are starting to discuss more at universities, and it's becoming quite topical. But I don't think that the average, say, person average 20-year-old in Australia would actually know that much about Bitcoin or maybe use it or anything like that. I think it's more something that right now, I think there's a lot of distance between people who, I suppose, hear about it and think, "Oh, it's this amazing new age currency. We're going to be using it in decades from now." But I think, no, I'm not sure. Maybe it's just an Australian thing. I don't feel like on the ground here it's super
Mhm.
widespread in terms of the knowledge about it. But in saying that, I don't think that there's necessarily a negative perception surrounding it. I don't think
Mhm.
that people are frightened by it. I think it's maybe just a lack of knowledge, to be honest.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're about to wrap up. Um, there's just one more thing I would like to ask you. Maybe it's you know, when I look at my Facebook feed and on my social media feed, there's always this discussion about some gender issues in the tech world, where it's predominantly still male, or and like females are being disadvantaged. So I just want to check: is that your experience, or is it just the newsmakers? Sometimes there's an incentive for news people to highlight things, even though that's not the case. I just want to hear a first-hand experience from you. Have you experienced being disadvantaged because you're female in the technology world?
I think, you know, I haven't personally experienced it head on, just within, you know, the workplace or at university or anything like that. But I would say I haven't necessarily experienced resistance or anything like that, but more so just kind of being treated differently, particularly in roles where I've taken on like a leadership role, or something where I've sort of had to stand up and really put my name on something and take ownership over whether it's an idea, maybe an organization. Particularly working in BCI, I'm quite involved in the society. I would say that as a woman, you definitely experience a lot of it's hard. I wouldn't say resistance. I'd more so just say that when you bring an idea to the table, it's definitely perceived differently than if it was a male. And that's purely because I think there are not enough girls out there who are getting involved and putting their hands up to be involved in higher, leadership positions, whether it's starting their own business, creating an amazing product, putting their name on it, and I suppose making themselves vulnerable and putting themselves out there, taking ownership over something. There's not enough people doing that, and until more girls are vocal and willing to, I suppose, stand up, and it's all great to say yes, we want equality in this particular sphere of STEM subjects in particular, which are traditionally dominated by males. It's until that happens, it's all well and good to say we want change, but it's not really going to happen if we don't actually put it into action. So I would say that I'm really, proud to put my hand up and say that I'm willingly putting myself out there and involving myself personally in things that not many other girls are putting their hands up to do. I'm not like naming anything specific here, but I mean, just particularly, I feel like leadership in technology is a real problem space for involvement of. Yeah. Sorry, that was sort of a jumbled up explanation of it.
No, it was really well said, and I hope people listening take that on board. Like, yeah, let's do it. Like, I mean, we're in 2017. To me, gender shouldn't be an issue anymore. We should have evolved now that it's not even worth discussing, because it's a non-issue. It's like,
exactly.
we're here. Yeah.
Exactly. And
that's where I want to be, right? It's no longer
it's girls putting their hands up, and it's also opening up the discussion so that they feel comfortable to do so. That goes for everybody. Like, I'm not pointing the finger at anybody. It's no one's fault. It's purely just, we need to create the environment where women feel accepted and they feel respected to a certain degree, where they can put up their hand and say, yes, I want to be involved more. I think we need to create an atmosphere where they feel a sense of acceptance and they're at peace. Yeah.
Awesome, and you're doing that. I could see it. I'm so proud of you, Sophie. Thank you for being a guest here. I really had fun, and I think we could just go on for hours, but
we could.
Yeah, maybe we could cut it now, and you can come back at a later date and see more stories from your experience.
Awesome. Been lovely chatting with you. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Awesome. Thank you. And subscribers, thank you for watching. Please share, comment, join the discussion. And if you found this video somewhere else and you're not yet subscribed, please go to the YouTube channel, press the subscribe button so that you can see future episodes, including when Sophie comes back.
Woo!
Thanks, Sophie.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.